You know how we both feel about the phrase, oh, stop being so political, for the simple reason that politics is personal. It's impossible to separate the political from so many spheres of, personal life, especially as we're being increasingly torn apart in 2024. But in reality, politics impacts pretty much most things or everything at times you do on the daily and often involves the things you care about the most for yourself, your family, and your community.
Totally. And I think that's why today we wanted to speak with someone who may not look like who you think of when you think of politicians, or at least not until VP Harris stepped even further into the spotlight. And we hope that you learn more about the importance of representation and why it is super duper extra important that every single one of us who are eligible to vote are registered and do show up to vote in this upcoming election in 2024. Welcome to the Dear White Women podcast, the show that helps white women use their privilege to uproot systemic racism without centering themselves in the process. We are your multi-ethnic best friends, Sarah and Misasha.
Mona, would you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Mona Das. I am a former state senator for Washington. I did a lot of work on diversity and equity, on the environment, on housing. And then when I left office after my first term, 4 years, I decided to go out and make a movie because why not? Why don't more senators make movies? I don't know. And so I made a movie called Badass Women Doing Kick-Ass Shit. And today I just got the trailer, the official movie poster and trailer, because the movie is going to be released on Election Day, November 5th. It's like so exciting to see all this hard work moving forward. And then is about Black and brown women running for office. There's 8 of us that are in it and 8 stories. And the stories are so similar. Like every single thing that someone said, I also experienced, and we're from different parts of the country, different ethnicities. And so that's like really powerful to me. And like, we were talking about right before we got on how important DEI work is. And movies like this, Badass Women Doing Kick-Ass Shit, to get released on Election Day in a historic election, right? Like who would have ever thought that a movie about Black and brown women running for office would suddenly be extremely topical with VP Harris running for president, which I don't know about you ladies, but I never, ever thought I would see someone that looked like me running for the highest office of the land. I still can't get over it.
Me neither, actually. And my kids, who are Black, Japanese, and white, when she was taking the oath of office for VP, I have a photo of them standing up with their hands because they saw themselves with her. So,
Wow.
and in her, and like the possibilities that you and VP Harris and so many people bring to this generation. Because I know growing up, I sure didn't see myself in office or, running for office. And I kind of want to ask about that because whenever I meet politicians, I'm always curious, like, was this something that you always knew you wanted to do? And like I ask also as the daughter of an immigrant father, right? Because this was like a path that was not really thought of in the same way, at least in our house. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your path.
I don't know about you, but I do my best thinking in the shower, as a lot of us do, I've now learned. And I was visiting my brother at the time, and I got out of the shower and I said, I'm going to be a senator. As the first thing I said. And we both laughed because I'm very classically Indian. Half my family are doctors, the other half are engineers. And so for me to say something as preposterous as I'm going to be a senator, we both literally laughed. Like we just laughed out loud because it was so absurd. But it was one of those ideas that I had that I put on a shelf. And you know those ideas. I call them now BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. And you put it on a shelf and sometimes you bring it down, you dust it off and you look and like, is this make sense? A lot of times it still doesn't make sense. You put it back on the shelf. And so this was that idea that I had that just kept coming back to me over and over again. I had just moved to Seattle and I was walking my dog. But as we were walking, I literally saw a sign, and that sign was a yard sign, and it said Pramila Jayapal for State Senate. And I saw that sign and I knew 3 things immediately. I knew she was a woman. I knew she was Indian, and it said Senate. And the fourth thing I realized at that moment was if she could do it, I could do it. And so what happened was I am standing in front, like my dog does not like to stop. And I am standing in front of that sign and I see my future like really written in front of me. And I am crying. Like I cannot stop crying. And again, you have to see it to be it. And that was the moment where I not only could see it, but realized somebody else was going to be it. And if she could do it, I knew I could do it. And my dog is like barking and pulling and wanting to go. And come on, mom, let's go. And I just couldn't. I was frozen because it was that first time I'd ever seen representation ever. And they say, like in politics, they say yard signs don't vote. So yard signs or whatever. And now I realize that it depends on the yard and it depends on who sees that yard sign. And for me that day, that was me. And then it happened November 2016, where we had, you know, an election that we thought we had in the bag go a completely different way. And I woke up the next morning and this is so weird. Like I usually like roll out of bed on my side. And that morning, I swear to you, I literally went whoop, like there was a lever behind my back and I just sat straight up in my bed and it was like, whoop. And I literally said, I'm running. I'm going to run. Meanwhile, my friends, especially my white women friends, are on the floor crying. They can't work. They can't sleep. They can't eat. They can't function. And I'm like determined as fuck. I'm like, let's go. We're going. I'm going to run. Let's get this done. And so it was, and this is sort of like the raise your hairs on your arms part of the story. Not only did I, you know, run for office, I mean, nobody thought I could beat this extremely well-liked Republican, good-looking, charismatic guy who doesn't look anything like me. Nobody thought he could be beat. I did it. And so then I win, right? And literally it's like by a handful of votes, like 900 and some votes. And this is like one of those stories about like every vote really does count. And I get to Olympia, which is the state capital of Washington, and I'm in my office and I picked out this office because it had a view of the dome. And like, I knew it was going to be hard days. And so I wanted to like remember why I was there. I was very purposely with my chief of staff. Like we were talking about, I was like, I want to have this view of this office, this dome, because on those hard ass days, I want to look at the building and know that I'm here for a reason and that I have to keep fighting. So I found out about 2 or 3 months after I was there that not only was Pramila also, she was the first Indian American state senator for Washington. She had my office, the same office. Jack 230, her office became my office. And I will tell you, when I found that out, I had to sit down. I couldn't believe it. Not only did I manifest, or what I like to say, monifest, like running and winning and being a senator and all that, but I like actually was physically in her goddamn office. Like it was so crazy. It's one of those things that you absolutely can't plan and can't know. And when I tell Pramila, and you know, Pramila and I have become good friends since then, but like when I told her that the first time, that was like literally in her office, she was like, she couldn't believe it. And for her, I know that's why she works so hard too. She knows that she is influencing the next generation. And I know I did and am. And that's why I made the movie, because I wanted to just make sure other young girls growing up like we did, like there was no leadership that looked like us ever, nowhere. And now there is. And I want to make sure that we encourage that and not just send an elevator down, not just send like raise an arm down to lift up the next, but like we've got to send elevators, fill them with women of color and bring them back up and guide them along the way, which is the work I'm really passionate about.
Thank you very much for like sharing this story. And I want to come back to talking about more about that Senate run and your experiences in office and your film. But I feel like I just heard from both of you truisms, like your lived experience about why representation matters. Misasha, with your boys, you know, Mona, with this inspiration and ultimately a friendship that came out of it. Sure. Okay. So we're being inspired. We see ourselves represented in elected positions. Can we just talk intellectually a little bit about that too? Why is it important to have a broader cross section of our population, of our incredibly diverse population in elected positions?
It's, I can say this with 100% certainty now, having been in that room. There is a room in the Washington State Capitol. It's called the Rules Room. And it is a photo of every Speaker of the House from the beginning of the House. And it is like all the way down until there was finally one Black man who was serving as interim. And then there was a LGBTQ woman. And those are just very recent, right? And so what happens when you create laws, because what you are as a senator or a state rep or, on the federal level, is you are a lawmaker. That is another term for senator or House member. It is lawmaker. You are literally making laws. So if you are creating laws based on who you know and what you know and your lived experience, it's leaving out huge swaths of people. And so what happened in this country is it is a country of immigrants from all over the place. And unless you are Native American, you came here on a boat or a plane, right? And so, or you walked over the border. But for the most part, the people who we are as an immigrant country are not reflected in these halls of power. And so laws are created based on what you know. And so for the folks of color that are in these elected positions, it is a lonely place, screaming from the hilltops, hey, my community, my people, my community, you have to be very vocal and loud for anyone to listen to you. And so when there was one, their voices were just completely drowned out. And so I can talk about the women of color in Washington State in the Senate. First, there was Pramila Jayapal, the one I was just talking about. Then the next year there were 2. Then the next year there were 4, right? And now there's 5 or 6. And so the voice gets louder because more and more people are saying it. And that is why it is critical to make sure our legislative bodies and our elected officials reflect our actual demographics and reflect our actual communities, because until they do, your community is left off the table. And I ran on the premise that if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. And women that look like us have been on the menu for far too long. And we don't even have to look into past. We know now about our reproductive rights and our reproductive freedoms. These are on the table again. When, and I talk to women who've been fighting for this stuff in the 70s. They're like, I can't believe I have to fight for this shit again. And it's like, it's back on, right? And so that is why this election, that is why it is critical to make sure that you find women to run, and especially diverse women, because until the diversity is reflected in these halls of power, our laws will continue to oppress and suppress and repress women and folks of color, period. And LGBTQ communities, until we had more LGBTQIA plus folks in elected office, we had things like the transgender ban and, all of the discrimination that comes across for those communities as well. And it's not right. And what I found being in those rooms, I heard things like those people. If you do a little Googling on me, I stood up. I think I was the first to do it, sounds like, and actually called my colleagues racist, sexist, misogynistic, and full of hate. And I was talking about the Senate Democrats. And I was talking about colleagues in my caucus that would say things like those people and say things like, if we favor that group, then we got to favor everybody. They're just going to keep coming back for handouts. Meanwhile, we're giving millions of dollars of tax breaks to Boeing, which is in our state. And so it doesn't make sense. And so what I started doing, I started calling it corporate welfare, and I called it corporate welfare for, the tax breaks for the corporations. And then I started calling it subsidies for folks that needed a little extra help, because it's completely reverse, right? And so we have got to help the folks that need it and stop giving those corporations all these tax breaks. They don't need it. They're doing just fine. And so I think that is why it is absolutely urgent to find folks on your ballot that represent your actual community makeup. And it's not the same people. And I will say this until I'm blue in the face, and thank God for Taylor Swift for actually mobilizing the young population, because truth be told, if the 18 to 30-year-olds actually voted, we wouldn't have this problem. All of the folks that have been there for 20, 30 years, none of these positions were meant for people to be there in their 80s. That was not the way that this system was designed. It was for people to come in for 4 to 6 years and then leave. And so what's happened is people turn this into a career and they stay. And so then you don't get that turnover. So if 18 to 30-year-olds actually voted in the same number that the 55 plus vote, we wouldn't have this issue, because those folks that have been there for the incumbency would be gone. And so I love Taylor Swift for doing what she did and making a stand and taking an issue that was important to her and making sure that her followers, which, you know, there's millions of them, understand the importance of voting, because these Swifties are definitely, a lot of them are over 18. And if they actually register, and here's the thing, it's not okay just to say you vote. Like, you have to actually register. That's the first step. Get registered, and then you can actually vote. And we have found that just because people register doesn't mean they actually vote. And so that's why we need to make sure, you know, hopefully she continually talks about it, and others. I'm waiting for Beyonce's endorsement to come out next. So
I love it. I love it. You know, so what I just heard was several things. One, if you know 18 to 30-year-olds, send them a copy of this podcast that you're listening to right now and say, have you registered to vote? And make sure that you show up on voting day. And then the second thing is, think about the people on your ballot who represent not just the rich white male population, who might do a great job representing more diverse interests than that narrow band, who have lived experiences that would reflect more of our population, who are obviously also qualified, because they are all there on the ballot from the very top all the way down to your local elections. So that's what I got so far. Now, I would love to hear, though, because you ran, you got a seat. What is it that white men and women do not know that happen to women of color when they're seeking office? Obviously, that ties into your unbelievably titled Badass Women Doing Kick-Ass Shit movie. Can you share a little bit about what is experienced when you are a person of color in such a public-facing role?
I'll talk about running for office. So there were only 12 people in the state of Washington that believed I could win. Luckily, I was one of them. And I am very good at compartmentalizing, and I literally put blinders on and I didn't listen to anyone. And I just knew I could do it. And because of Pramila and all of these other women out there that I saw that did the same thing, that ran and won impossible races. And I knew I could do it. And that comes internally. Like, you have to know you can do it, because there are really hard days on the campaign trail. Women of color do not have access to the same money, because we typically don't have huge Rolodexes of wealthy people, right? So the first thing that you do when you run for office is you call your friends and family list. So if your friends and family list are people who can donate $10, which feels great, by the way, some of my favorite donations were the ones that gave, you know, I had like a little girl give $3.24 or whatever it was, right? Like, that is really meaningful, but it needs to add up. And so until women of color are seen as fundraisers, and luckily for me, I have a sales background, so I nailed raising money. Like, I just turned my sales background into fundraising. And in fact, later today, we just launched a PAC too. I haven't even told you this. We launched a PAC called Badass Women PAC. And it is, yes, we did. I will give you the website. It is BAWPAC.com. And it is obviously on our Badass Women brand. But the PAC is for women of color in swing states and swing districts. I think we've identified 18 candidates in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and a couple of seats in Washington, because obviously that's where I'm from. And so this has been a labor of love to get these women elected. And we know if we get them elected, then it will help elect Kamala Harris, especially in these swing states and swing districts. So it's all together. But what happens is women of color just raise less money. We have less opportunity. We have less access to capital, and we're not believed. We are not believed that we can do it to win. And, you know, just like they say in Hamilton, like let the immigrants do it. I forget the exact line, but it's like give the job to an immigrant. It's like, we have this hustle, we have this grit, we have this tenacity that no one has ever seen. And I have a funny story about when I was in the Senate, I was given an hour to get this one particular lobbyist to say yes to me so that we could put the bill on the floor and we could run it that night. And I'm sitting there with this lobbyist, of course. He looks exactly the opposite of me. So I'll let you decide what that looks like. And I just kept like, come on, let's do it. Let's do it. Like, blah, blah, blah. And I was giving him all these different reasons and things. And he looks at me and he starts smiling. And I was like, what? And he's like, I heard about you. And I was like, what did you hear? And he's like, I heard that you never give up. And I just looked at him. I was like, how the fuck do you think I got here? It was like, like, how do you think that I'm sitting here as a senator in front of you if I just gave up? Like, that's what it takes for our communities to win. And I see that hunger. We're doing podcast interviews as well with all the women that we're supporting right now. And the stories are the same, right? Like why they're doing it. I find it's based on community, and it's not the other reasons for clout and power. And like, no one says that. No one on these podcast interviews that I'm doing says anything about any of those things. And I think that's what we have too in the past is people run for different reasons. And being in the room and why it's important is because in the state of Washington, at least when I was there were 28 people in the majority party in the Senate, Democrats, and those are the decision makers. And if you don't have enough people with a diverse voice, you get that, that groupthink going. And then everyone just pats themselves on the back for knowing what's right about the bill. But you have to take into consideration other communities and the ones that are going to be affected by the laws that we put in place, right? And one of the things that I come to realize over the last few years is that we always talk about these broken systems. Guess what? They're not actually broken. They are working exactly the way they were designed to work. And the reason they were designed to work that way is to keep the property landowners, wealthy white men in power. And for so long, it's still been working. In fact, I just was on a team call with my team and we were talking about imposter syndrome and like why we put ourselves in a lane and why we don't like go for the things that we want to do. And that's like all patriarchy because we've been told so long for so many years, stay in your lane. That's not for you. Don't understand that. And these systems and this is the most profound thing I discovered. One of them. It is so complicated to pass a bill, like to actually pass a bill. And I passed 28 in 4 years, which is unheard of. It is so complicated and so complex. And you know what? It's literally on purpose. It is so regular, everyday people cannot affect change, cannot understand the system, cannot be part of the system. And that's where the bullshit lies because it's so complicated. It took me a year to figure out what the hell I was doing. Luckily, I have a different philosophy. I hire really smart people and let them help me. I literally ask for help and like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. What do I do? And the woman that I hired to run my team had been in the legislature working for another senator for 4 years. So I'd come in every day and she'd be like, okay, do these 5 things. And I would be like, okay. And I would do them like, cause she knew way more than I did. Right. And so one of my lessons in life is hire people smarter than you and let them lead and let them guide you because you don't know everything. You can't know everything. And other people have different perspectives and you should listen to those.
There are so many things that you said that I want to talk about. I'm having a hard time deciding where to go next because all of that, especially like the lawyer in me loves everything that you said about how difficult and complex things are. And also the constitutional like scholar side of like all of my constitutional law classes totally co-sign everything you said about the systems working exactly like how they're designed to do. So I think I'm going to ask this, which is a little bit back to the voters who are 18 to 30. And I think about this in reference to my own boys who are almost 12 and 10. And when I talk to them about politics, I've tried to tell them about this time period that existed before 2016, right? Because they have no concept of a political system. I tried to tell them this complicated story of when I was in fifth grade, we talked all about like it was a primary season. And so there were like a whole bunch of candidates running because that was 1988 and like Reagan was done with his second term. And so like this is how we talked across the aisle and we learned how to represent different opinions and understand and listen to people because we were all in it sort of for different reasons, but trying to build consensus. And that concept seems to be completely lost nowadays. So this is for like my kids and a lot of people who may be a Swiftie and thinking like, okay, like I know Taylor wants me to vote, but like, what's the point? Because like it's so divisive, or I live in a state where my vote doesn't matter, or oh, I don't even want to think about politics. It's too hard to talk about. So how has that changed? And what would you say to especially this next generation about like how they can think about their vote?
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's a great question. And it does sometimes feel like you're one person in a sea of, whatever. But I will tell you, every single person that you vote for is important. And I know of so many races that were decided by one of my colleagues was 104 votes she won by. And there's another vote that's happening right now where like it was like 50, I think it was 47 votes, right? There's so many races that are literally that close. I will also say all politics is local. So it's great to vote for your congressional, your federal congressional delegates, your House representatives and senators, and obviously president. But the most important races for you and you personally are your local ones, your school boards, your city councils, your commissioners. There are some there are some districts, some counties that have 3 county commissioners. That's it. So there are 3 people deciding everything about like all your utilities, all of the stuff that affects your pocketbook every single day, what we call kitchen table issues, which is like economy, healthcare, like what you're paying at the grocery store, your taxes. And so once you start to really like dive in and understand what the issues are, you can then know that you are making a difference, not only on the federal level, absolutely, but the local level is the one that affects you and your family the most. And it's really important to make sure that you are casting your vote. Like people fought for years and died to make sure that, especially for the women's suffragette movement, like so many people literally gave their every ounce of their beings to make sure that we actually had the right to vote. And so I hope that young women especially do not take that for granted, because it wasn't very long ago. And you all know this, you've read it all. Like, was it the 70s where women finally got the right to have a credit card or be on a mortgage? Right. So your only hope in life back then was literally to get married. And that is no longer the case, because we have those rights to have a credit card, get our own mortgage, be in charge of our own financial destiny. And so there's nothing more important in November, and whatever your primary date is, where depending on what state you live in, to then cast your ballot and look at it as a right and a privilege. There are so many countries out there right now that are not democracies and that don't have that right, and then have, people deciding the fate of their lives and bring them much harm. And if you want to move forward and you're upset about these things, especially reproductive rights, or, what's going on with school shootings, and I mean, there's so many issues that directly affect young folks. The way to counteract that is by exercising your right that you have as an American citizen to vote. And and it's also a habit, right? So if you get in the habit of doing it, then you'll be in the habit of doing it. Like, it is so important to get, and I love it when in Washington State and Oregon, the 2 states that I lived in where I've been voting are all mail-in ballots. Like there's actually no polling place. We're 100% mail-in. And so it is kind of fun to see parents sit down at the kitchen table with their kids and like let them fill in the bubbles, right? Like give them that excitement of like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this for my mom or my dad or my guardian or whoever is their legal guardian. And so getting in the habit of voting, because at some point, and as an 18-year-old, you might not understand. I mean, I think like we obviously did not grow up with shooter drills in our schools, and that has got to affect the kids. Like I know I have a friend in Arizona that was just talking about her kid who was afraid to go to school because it was a bomb threat the first day of school. And then she didn't want to go to school the next day. Well, of course, why would you want to go to school when you think you're not going to make it home? Like these things are really top of mind. And I hope they are issues that young folks do care about enough to actually get out and vote. And I will tell you what, if people vote this election cycle and it's the young demographic and the young folks of color and all the women, like we will not have number 45 will not become number 47. And that is what we need to definitely prevent. I can't say his name in good conscience out loud. So there you go.
So I love that you spoke to the young folks, that you spoke to the people of color, that like these are real life issues that affect all of our lives. And I think VP Harris has done an incredible job navigating some of the race-based like things that are being thrown at her at the moment. If we were to have a conversation then about what more like white folks would do differently when it comes to voting or thinking about our politics as a nation, what would you say to the white folks listening right now?
I would say do your research, right? And understand what your community needs. Because as the white folks who are, currently the majority of the voting bloc for the most part, like your decisions that you affect will make the difference for generations to come. And I find that younger generations do not have the same race issues that I grew up with. I'm a woman in my 50s, right? And I grew up in rural Pennsylvania as the only brown kid in the school. And it was hard. And I had to, I have a saying, I moved around a lot as a kid. I've lived in 8 states and 3 countries. And my saying is make friends before lunch or eat alone. And I do believe that kids, at least in my hope of hopes, that kids are, there's so many biracial kids now, right? There's so much more. Yeah, exactly. And there's so many more biracial kids that I think race is a topic that it has diminished in its power for the younger generation. At least that's my hope of hopes. And I think white folks in our country can be leaders on these issues that affect everyone. And this is my firm belief. It's when, and of course, a lot of it is enlisting your own trauma to come out to talk about issues that hurt. But I think of all the LGBTQIA plus community folks that came out to their families because they heard them spewing hate to them, not realizing that they were harming them. And as more folks came out, more folks realized, oh my gosh, I have a gay son, or I have a gay nephew, or an LGBTQIA niece, or whatever, or trans child in my family. And that's when I saw the role effect of more liberal, more inclusive, and more tolerant views on LGBTQIA community. Have all the issues been solved? No, absolutely not. But I think if you really think about all of the people that you are affecting, and I will say this to folks who are religious and spout Christian values. Christian values are love thy neighbor, right? Those are actual Christian values. And I would be really excited to see folks really embrace that. I love, so even some of the things that you have in your background, Sarah, and all of those, yard signs that are out there, about loving thy neighbor and loving, we care about this community, we care about that community, we care about it's all community. And if we continue to harm folks of color and women, LGBTQIA folks, it's harming all of us. And so that to me is a really big idea, or a call to action. Please think about others when you make your vote, because we know what happened the last time we had a president that spewed a lot of hate. There was a lot of violence, and that just trickles to everyone, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think what I'm hearing you say is okay, if you have people, think about all of the people in your life who are not built just like you, who may not have the same privileges as you. Even if you have interpersonal care and community for them, that's great. But the systematic issues that have oppressed people have not gone away. And so you cannot say you love these folks if you're going to vote for something that will continue to oppress them. It is time to put our vote where our hearts are and make that change and help to change the systems that have continued to hurt folks that are historically been oppressed and marginalized in our country.
Well, I had the absolute honor and privilege to go to the DNC in Chicago just a few weeks ago. And I can't tell you what I left. I just left with hope and optimism and excitement. Every single speech that I saw, and I was there 2 of the 4 nights, I believe, was about moving America and our country forward and not backwards. And for me, that means progress. It means inclusivity. It means diversity and equity are the forefront. It means not going backwards. It means not stripping the rights that we have. It means things like fertility treatment. I mean, come on. It's like we're talking about fertility treatments where it's illegal in some states. Like, that is not okay. And so I left the DNC with this extreme optimism. And of course, for the first time, right, a woman of color is, and she's also biracial, right? So like that, she is, her election in itself as a woman, as a Jamaican woman, as an Indian woman, as a Californian, as a West Coaster, right? Like so many, she is like so many things to so many people. And she's done the work, right? Like that's the thing about VP Harris is she's done the work. She's been in those trenches and she was there and available to step up when, you know, President Biden did the right thing and stepped aside. And stepped aside for a woman and a woman of color is so powerful. And I just think about what that did to all of us regardless of how you're going to vote, it was something of note, right? And I think for me, like I wasn't planning on really getting involved in this election cycle, nor like I wasn't going to start a PAC and like do all this work that we've been doing for women's leadership, but it was, I couldn't not do it. Like I couldn't be in the position that I'm in, knowing what I know, having gone through what I went through, having been in elected office, and then not do something with that. So it was really, really powerful for me.
I love that because I watched the DNC on TV. Like I wasn't lucky enough to be there, but that was kind of the shot of hope that I personally needed in that moment. I got to watch it with my boys who also got to see like, oh, hey, like we can feel really good about
someone that
politics.
Looks like them. Right. Yeah.
Yes. And to hear speeches about how we can come together and how we value our communities in ways that are not as common was wonderful. So I love, because Sarah and I have been talking a lot on the podcast about doing something, right? Like Michelle Obama's call to do something. And how do we do that? And how does it look for everyone? So I love that you shared all of what you're doing with our listeners. And I want to sort of wrap by asking, where can people find out more about you? And also, where can they find out more about your amazing movie, which has the best title ever, by the way? So give us all the details about that.
Thank you so much. Well, the movie's website is the initials, Badass Women Doing Kick-Ass Shit. So it's I got to make sure I was spelling it right. BAWDKAS.com. That's the movie website. The PAC is BAW, Badass Women PAC, PAC.com. My website is monadas.org. And the work that we are doing is we are just launching our nonprofit called Canary Revolution. We are looking for canaries in the coal mine, folks that are just can't stop, won't stop, and offering leadership training and like a cohort-based model for women in leadership to take their leadership to the next level. And I think what happens to a lot of women is you get to a certain level and you look around and you're like, oh shit, I'm the only one here. Who do I talk to? And that is really what we're trying to do is get women together to talk about these deep issues, things that they want to change. And like, people that have been affected by these traumas or these these systems that are not there for them. How do we change the systems? Because the systems actually need to be reimagined. And that's the type of work we're doing. And we're really excited about it.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing this time with us.
Thank you, ladies. It was so fun. Y'all are amazing. Thank you for doing this podcast, and the work you're doing, I think, is just absolutely incredible. So thank you for having me on.
Of course. Thank you. You've just listened to the Dear White Women podcast with your hosts, Sarah and me, Sasha. Yes, we're on social media, and yes, you can hire us to do talks about our book, but the biggest thing, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to receive our free materials. Head over to dearwhitewomen.com to get on the list.